Mediterranean diet. A lot of that is just the science behind the Mediterranean diet and why we know that it is good for us. So I won't bore you with all the statistics, and I'll just let you know that I am careful to not really claim a lot of statistics because I don't want to lead us down a rabbit trail, and it's hard for me to prove that to you. So I just go with this. I say may instead of will most of the time, and I try not to make any grand promises about anything diet related because everyone is individual. You're all different, and what works for one person may not work very well for another person. So those are kind of my disclaimers before we get started. And so if everybody's comfortable, I'll go ahead and start the presentation. On your flyer, if you have my flyer at home on your refrigerator, it says something about eating for heart health or something. I changed that name for today's presentation to an approach to better health, because it really is an approach. It's not really a diet, okay? So we'll get into that in just a minute. So is it a diet or a lifestyle? Well, I decided that I'm going to call it the Mediterranean way. It's a way of life. And I found this quote, a way of life that includes the diet, activity, and social habits of people living in the countries that border the Mediterranean Sea. So that's really where all of this started. The Mediterranean diet started around the Mediterranean Sea. When we look at the Mediterranean Sea, we can see a lot of different countries, and some of those countries are really popular for good food. We all know about Italian food. Spanish food is really good. Then we go over there to Greece. Greek food is delicious for some of us. And so you just look at it. The Mediterranean Sea is bordered on the north by Europe, and then Asia, and then Africa down here on the south. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those countries. The Mediterranean Sea is almost an intercoastal or an inland sea. There's only one place that there's a narrow joining to the other seas, but it's really just one big sea surrounded by land, okay? Like I said, it's bordered on the north by Europe, and when we think about food, we think about those four countries, don't we? So those are European countries that we really think about when we think about really good food. And it's spicy food, it's rich food, it's comforting. Then it's bordered on the east by Asia, and we think about Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey. What about those three countries? Do you know much about? Well, those are what we think of when we think about biblical times. So when you think about the history of the Bible, you think about the countries that are in Syria and Lebanon, especially. And then it's bordered on the south by North Africa. We think about Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and then Egypt. Egypt's a little bit in Asia and a little bit in Africa. So it's kind of in those two countries. So what is it about the climate and the topography of the Mediterranean area? Some people call it the Mediterranean region, and some people call it the Mediterranean basin. So I'll probably just call it the Mediterranean area. So all along that coastal area, it's real warm. They have really warm, sunny days. They have cool nights, and then they have this erratic kind of rainfall. It's quite moist at most times because of the ocean's there, and so it makes it conducive to being rainy. It has a real wine of Italy. What do you think about the boot? And then a lot of those cities or towns are built right on the ocean, but they don't have an oceanfront property like we want to think of. It's not a nice beach area. It's mountainous, but they built right into the mountain. So it's very irregular. And because of that and the salt water, there are lots of different types of soil, which leads to a lot of good food being grown in the Mediterranean area. They can grow almost anything. Unlike us, where we have to struggle to grow one thing, they can grow so many things. Citrus fruits, let me go back, olives. Olives are one of the things that they grow. We know that that's where all of our good olive oil comes from, is the Mediterranean area. And the olive trees are really acclimated to that climate and that soil condition because they have long roots that go out and they have limited foliage, so they don't have to spend all their time on the leaves. They can put it into the olives themselves. Anybody have an olive tree? If you have an olive tree that has not been treated to not produce olives, they are prolific. We have an olive tree in my front yard that it grows olives. I never do anything with them because it's a real process, but I should maybe. But anyway, it is so prolific. There are so many olives on that. So if you have a good place to grow olives, you can really grow a lot. Also, figs and dates. The fig trees and the date trees are sort of the same. You know what a date tree is, a date palm. So think about it. The roots are sort of shallow. They don't need to get way down to water. And then that canopy of leaves is not much to maintain. Very well adapted to that climate. And then figs too. Figs we can grow here, which is a good thing. But there they grow a different type of fig than we grow here. So, but they grow well. They grow really well. Another thing, let me back up to the figs and the dates. Another thing about figs and the dates is they store well because you can dry them and then you can keep them for a long time. They don't go bad like peaches or something like that. You can really grow them or store them for a while. And the other thing is they come into season at a different time. So you have several harvests of especially figs. We also know that they raise a lot of citrus there, and that's because the trees are similar to that olive tree, but then the skin of the fruit is really thick. So you can think about how that helps kind of protect what's inside the fruit, and so it's well adapted to that hot, dry climate. And of course, grapes. We know that grapes grow in the Mediterranean area. You know, back to biblical times, they grew grapes and made wine, and then now they still grow lots of grapes and make lots of good wine in that country. And there's different regions of the country, and every region has its own kind of grapes. And it's a lot in part to the different soil in the region that will give them certain flavors. So there's just a lot of grapes there, and a lot of good wine. Of course, grapes are good to eat just out of hand. And then once again, they can be dried and made into raisins for storage purposes. And then fresh fruits or fresh vegetables and legumes. So I just listed a few, and in some of your handouts there'll be some others. But these are just some of the typical ones. Eggplant grows really well there. Cucumbers do well. Chilies of every kind do well. I mixed on tomatoes because I don't know if tomatoes were brought into the Mediterranean from somewhere else, or if they are just native to that area. So I'm going to not say anything about tomatoes, but I know they use a lot of tomatoes now. So I just don't know how long that has been. Then chickpeas, lentils, and white beans are, just ancient. A lot of the grains and the legumes have been grown in that area forever. So grains like wheat, barley, couscous, and rice, just probably a lot of other grains that we've talked about before in class, the grains that we call ancient grains. I imagine that a lot of those are grown in the area too, but these are the ones that are most grown. The wheat, of course, is what makes couscous. Do you know about what couscous is? It's really almost a pasta. So, but it's made out of wheat, and usually whole wheat is what they make theirs out of in the Mediterranean area. I think that sometimes what we get is not, it's like refined wheat. So you want to watch, if you like couscous, watch and see if you can get a good quality imported couscous that's made out of whole grain. So where's the meat? Well, there aren't very many grazing animals in that area. The grass doesn't grow very well because it has such shallow roots, so it dries out, and so there aren't very many grazing animals in that area. Fish is readily available, of course, along the coast, so lots of good fresh seafood and fish. And then they do raise some poultry, and it's grain-fed, as you can imagine. So they have their chickens and what have you in their yards, and they do, get their eggs, and they do use eggs some. So there's not really a lot of meat, and we're going to look at that. So historically, we eat what we have, don't we? We eat what's available to us. So if you think about the first Thanksgiving dinner, we all think that probably they had turkey. Well, they probably did have turkey, but it's not like the turkey we have on our tables today. And probably the Native Americans, we have learned over the years, they probably brought lobster and things like that. At one point in our history, lobster was not this expensive, rich food. It was like, there was so much lobster that the poor people ate lobster. So it's, you eat what you have. And then the other thing is, in our more recent years here in America, the Native Americans grew what grew well where they were. They didn't try to grow corn up in the Rocky Mountains because it wouldn't grow there. They didn't have a long enough season. But here in the Southwest and on the plains, they grew a lot of beans, corn, and squash. And I always like to tell the legend of and I can't remember which tribe it is, but there's a Native American legend that is about the three sisters. And what that says is that if you plant the crops together, they will each support one another. And so it's three sisters supporting one another. They plant the corn, and it starts to grow. And corn, if you've ever grown corn, it tends to bend in the wind, and it can be blown over because it has shallow roots. So then they planted beans that they didn't know this. Probably somebody just took some seeds and threw them out there, and it grew. But anyway, then they would plant the beans around the corn. Beans have longer roots, and so they would grow up around the stalk of the corn, and they would support the corn from being blown over because they had stronger roots. And then they would plant squash, which the big leaves of the squash would protect the soil from the sun and conserve water. So 3 sisters growing together are better than just one sister by herself. So that's kind of that legend, and that's where what you have is what you eat. The Native Americans could dry all of those things. The corn could be dried, the beans are dried, and the squash is more like pumpkin, it's dry, and then it carries them through the winter. And nutritionally speaking, the nutrients complement each other and provide really all that you need to survive. So it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? People along that Mediterranean coast pretty much ate what they had. And what they didn't know when they were eating, this is historically, when they were eating what they had, they were eating things that were very good for them, very helpful. And what they had created these wonderfully delicious and satisfying meals. And the climate and slower lifestyle in that area made it very easy for them to be active and very easy for them to have gardens and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about lifestyle in a few minutes. But they did seem to be more active. So, I'm not going to talk about the Mediterranean diet any longer, because the Mediterranean way is not a diet. We don't go off it, and we don't go on it or fall off of it. We live it. So it is a lifestyle. There's a food component and a lifestyle component. I told you we'd get back to the lifestyle in a few minutes. But they really combine good food with a lifestyle which is kind of laid back. They get some exercise. They get some rest. They garden. They just live a simpler life than we do. So let's talk about the food. This is a little different than what we think about when we think about the typical food pyramid and the food groups, because we kind of, in the Mediterranean way, we kind of take things apart. Grains is one group, and then legumes, and then nuts, vegetables, fruit, healthy fats, dairy, and protein. And if you look here at the food pyramid, we're going back to the original food guide pyramid to look at this. The first thing is they get some daily physical activity. So they're very careful, and this was historically, I'm going to talk about it as historically, they were very careful to have that exercise. And then their diet really relies a lot on grains, the whole grains. And this goes back to our first food guide pyramid. If you remember, we used to base our diet on grains, didn't we? If you can remember that first food guide pyramid, it showed 6 to 11 servings of grains a day. So that's sort of what the Mediterranean way does. Then the next thing is vegetables, fruits, beans and legumes, and nuts. And then after that is olive oil and cheese and yogurt. So this is, you need more of the grains, more of the fruits and what have you, and less servings as you go up. If you see over here on the right, it says have those things daily. So those are the foods that you want to have every day. Whole grains, vegetables, fruits, beans, legumes, nuts, olive oil, and cheese and yogurt. And then once a week, you can have fish, poultry, eggs, and sweets. Now remember, this is historically kind of how they did it. And then monthly basis, meat, which is the red meats. And when we talk about red meat, it's beef and pork and lamb, goat, things like that, okay? So let's talk about the grains. Predominantly in the Mediterranean area, you see whole wheat, barley, and rice, depending on the region. The whole wheat would be made into bread or into couscous, or into other pastas. So we know that in Italy there's a lot of pasta, and there has been for years, so it's not a new thing. Barley can be ground and used as a flour, but usually it's added to soups or stews and sometimes used as a porridge, so as a cereal. They ate then, and they still eat, a lot of good bread, they don't do is they don't slather the butter and garlic on it like we do, but rather they dip it into olive oil, which a lot of times is flavored with herbs or garlic. So that's how they eat the bread. The grains provide fiber. Remember that whole grains provide lots of good fiber. Also, they provide complex carbohydrates. They're a good source of carbohydrates, which are good for energy. That's what gives us energy. Our body wants to burn them for energy. They also have protein and then antioxidants and phytochemicals. So you have to come next month and I'll tell you more about antioxidants and phytochemicals. I'm just going to tell you today that they're very good for us. They help us fight, they help our immune system, and they also help us fight diseases, especially inflammation, things like autoimmune disorders, arthritis, fibromyalgia, those kinds of things which are based on inflammation. Grains can be used in salads or served as a side dish, used as cereal, used and put in soups and stews. So those are some of the ways that they would use grains other than just grinding them and making breads out of them. So, and then remember, olive oil, not butter. That's a big key component in the Mediterranean way is olive oil. I'll wait for a minute to tell you that. Beans and legumes. Beans, lentils, and peas. Garbanzo beans and cannellini beans, or the big white kidney beans, are what is traditional. Lentils, they have lots of lentils, red ones, orange ones, brown ones, green ones. They tended to raise the red and the orange in that region historically. And then peas, black-eyed peas, garden peas, things like that. The legumes, that whole family of vegetables, it's really a vegetable, is high in protein and high in fiber. They are very high in protein, really make good use of vegetables for protein sources. What else is there about them? They are very inexpensive. So beans and legumes are very inexpensive, which makes it easy for people who are on a budget to get plenty of protein. They're very versatile. They can be made into a soup or a stew. They can be added to salads. They can be served on their own. They can go into, we make black bean like patties for burgers, things like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do with beans. And some cashews. But there are a lot of other really good nuts that we can use. Nuts, and then nut butters. Lots of nut butters, and we're seeing on the market here a lot of increase in butters. Seed butter like sunflower seed. Tahini is made out of sesame seeds, and it's a real creamy dressing-like consistency or butter. So what about these? Well, many nuts grow in that region, and they're high in protein. They're high in the heart-healthy fat. So you'll hear people say, "Oh, I can't eat nuts because they have so much fat in them." Yes, they do, but remember, it's heart-healthy fat. So when you think about that, yes, they're high in calories, so you eat a small portion, but they're also heart-healthy fat. You can add them to salads, you can eat them as a snack, but eat them in moderation if you're worried about the calories, okay? And then vegetables. Oh my goodness, every vegetable, like I said, grows in that area. They must have great gardens. I would love to go and just look at the gardens. But you can see the list of vegetables there. Remember, vegetables provide fiber, complex carbohydrates, those phytochemicals again. You can use them raw. One of the sources that I was reviewing said that at least 2 servings of vegetables a day should be raw. I don't know if they should or not, but that's what that one source thought. historically in the Mediterranean area, people would eat 7 to 10 servings per day. So a serving of vegetables cooked is a half a cup. So think about how much that is. If you ate 10 servings, it would be 5 cups. That would really fill you up with lots of good nutrients. Many Greeks consume a pound a day of vegetables. So that's a good thing, and we'll get to why that's a good thing in a minute. Besides the phytochemicals, they have that fiber. What does fiber help us with? So many things. It helps with our blood sugar. It helps with our cholesterol. It helps with our digestive system. It just does so much for us. So when you think about the fiber, think about that. Oops. Fruits, same thing. Remember what I told you a while ago? Citrus, grapes, all those good figs, good dates, great sources of fiber, excellent sources of phytochemicals and antioxidants. And those things help us fight disease, helps prevent cellular damage. So that's what those things work on, is at the cell level to prevent damage. Fruit historically was used for dessert, and so it's sweet. They didn't eat any kind of rich cakes and cookies like we do, but they would have fruit, and maybe they'd have a piece of cheese and a fruit for dessert, or some yogurt with some fruit for dessert. And so I'd like to say to get somewhere around 3 to 4 servings of fruit a day. It's not that hard. A small apple is a serving. Once again, a half a cup of cut up fruit is a serving. Someone asked me the other day about grapes, and there has been this historic, in my life anyway, this historic thing about how many grapes can you eat for a serving. One time we would tell everyone 14 grapes, okay? Or now it's 17 grapes. Well, the other day I had some grapes in that fruit salad Sunday. I had to cut them in half because they were huge. So I don't think it's 17 of those, but is it 17 of those little tiny champagne grapes? I don't know. It's just eat some. Just what looks like a healthy serving. Put them in your hand. So try to get 3 to 4 servings a day. Healthy fats. Okay, we talked a little bit about olive oil. There's canola oil, the fats in nuts, the fats in the fatty fish. So these are our heart-healthy fats. We want to have plenty of virgin or extra virgin olive oil. And it's important that when you shop for olive oil, that you shop for virgin or extra virgin, because that means they are less processed. They have been processed minimally so that it keeps all of the nutrients that are in the olive oil. Olive oil has some antioxidant effect to it, so that's one of the reasons to get the good olive oil. And I think it just tastes better. But who cares about taste, right? Then there's the fatty fish. Have you heard about omega-3 fatty acids, and you need to have that? Well, that's in fatty fishes. So you want to try to eat that about twice a week. I think maybe a little bit more. But you can eat it. You can get herring. Albacore tuna is high in omega-3s. Sardines, salmon, lake trout, and mackerel. So those are the predominant fish that are high in omega-3s. But all fish is good for you because fish is very lean, so it's a lean protein. Even seafood is very lean, so even though we talk about some of the things about, shrimp is sometimes gets a bad name, but it's really good. It's really very lean, and it's got a lot of good nutrients. So once again, it's just do it in moderation, but do try to eat fish twice a week. And if anyone not like fish? Okay, I only saw one hand go up. And sometimes you just have to experiment because we're seeing more more and more fish on the market today that is milder, and it's usually that real strong flavor that people don't like. So real mild fish like tilapia or swai is really good. So start with those mild fish if you need to. The next thing is dairy. Remember I said that there weren't a lot of beef or a lot of cows in the Mediterranean area because they didn't have the fields for them to graze in. So they didn't have very many, but they did have some. And so that's why they used very little milk, really, but they did have some. Way back in history, of course, they used camel milk and then goat milk and sheep's milk. And still today in the Mediterranean area, you see a lot of sheep's or goat's milk used, and especially for cheese making. So you'll see, it's a lot of it imported here. When you go to the deli kind of area at the grocery store and you see all those cheeses, you'll see sheep's milk cheeses and goat's milk cheeses. And that's been historically the case. It is a good source of protein, and it does provide a lot of calcium. Historically, though, it's not a big player in the diet in the Mediterranean area. It was eaten in much smaller amounts. When I was reading, I saw how they first made pizza. The first pizza was the margarita pizza, or that's what the article said anyway. What it was a very fresh tomato sauce made out of fresh tomatoes, not cooked, and they spread that on a piece of almost like cracker bread, and then they put mozzarella, but not sprinkled in big gobs. They just put little chunks of mozzarella here and there, and basil, and they cooked it. It's a far cry from what we eat as pizza today. But when you think about the historical pizza, think how good that is. You have this nice paper-thin crust made out of wheat, and then you have that antioxidant-rich tomato sauce that hasn't been cooked or anything, and then you have that protein-rich mozzarella, small amount of it, and some fresh basil out of the garden, which also is high in antioxidants. So how good can that be for you, really? So you think about it, and you have to really think about how they ate what they had. So dairy, the other place that we see dairy is in yogurt, especially the Greek yogurt. So that is very high in protein, very nutrient rich, but you just need a little bit. You don't need it, we don't eat a cup, we eat half a cup for a serving, and have that with some fruit on top and maybe some nuts on that. And then fruit and cheese for dessert, or fruit and nuts for dessert. So those are kind of the things that you would use dairy for. And protein. Everybody always worries about protein. Well, there are times when I tell people to eat protein and to eat more protein. Has anybody been to one of my surgery classes? We do a surgery class on Thursdays, and Margaret's nodding her head because first thing I talk about is protein. When you are healing from surgery or an illness, then you need to pay attention to your protein needs. But most of us get plenty of protein. And even historically in the Mediterranean area, they didn't worry about protein because of what they were eating. They were eating things that are rich in protein. So legumes, grains, nuts, fish, dairy, eggs, poultry, seafood, and beef, and sausage, bacon, and processed meat. Eat them in the order they're listed. More legumes, more whole grains, more nuts, fish, and less beef. So you want to kind of eat them in the order they have listed there. Eggs are eaten in moderation in the Mediterranean, historically. They did eat eggs, and even before, back in the Bible era, they ate lots of quail and then later on they're domesticated chickens and what have you. And now, even here in the United States, we eat eggs, like we eat duck eggs and we eat chicken eggs and quail eggs, so all the eggs, okay? But in moderation. Poultry, eaten in moderation, and it was in the Mediterranean area. Remember that they had chickens in their yards to provide eggs and meat, but they didn't have them in massive quantities. So they just ate chicken when they had it, probably for a celebration, or when that chicken broke its wing or whatever. It wasn't just something that, okay, I'm gonna raise all these chickens and we're gonna have one each day, because that's not what they did. But we have more access to it, and we have access to just the breast without the skin. And so that's what I recommend now for poultry, is the skinless breast. And they ate it in moderation, and I would say a couple of times a week is great, depending on how you prepare it. Shrimp, beef, remember historically they ate it very rarely. It was like a celebration time that they would actually eat beef or have a lamb, roast a lamb. So it historically was eaten in moderation. And then processed meats, historically there weren't very many. They did dry some meats, but it was not processed like we process things. It would be just dried meat. And then now we know that it's very high in sodium, so we want to watch those things in our diet. So once again, here's that pyramid of how to eat, what you eat first and the most of. So more food facts. People in the Mediterranean area tend to cook at home. They don't go out to eat. That's what they do at home. They eat at home, and they cook big meals and nourishing meals. They rely on leftovers. If there's a bit of leftover fish or chicken, they'll add it to the soup pot the next day. So it tends to be, their food is very well utilized. They use what's fresh and in season. So what do? We have things coming to us from all over the world. So we can buy watermelon every day of the year. But there, they only use watermelon if watermelon's in season. That's one of the keys to this, is that using fresh and what's in season is what's best. They enjoy eating with family and friends. A lot of their meals are around big tables, and this is still the case for most people. I'll talk to you a little bit about what's happened in recent years in a minute. They always have red wine, usually as a part of their meal. They don't tend to drink between meals. It's just with meals they would have a glass of red wine. And we know, once again, red wine because of the antioxidants in it. Okay, I'm gonna stop here for just a second from the slides. I want to talk to you about what has happened. Historically, the people in the Mediterranean area were very, very healthy. They had very low incidence of cardiovascular disease, almost no cancer. They're very healthy, lean, because they were so active. And what has happened now, though, with the Western world influencing them, they have started to eat more saturated fat, fewer vegetables and fruits, and so they're seeing more and more cardiovascular disease and other diseases. So what I'm talking to you about is, historically, we need to eat the way they ate historically, not the way some of them eat today. However, a study that I did read said that even with all of that the Mediterranean area tends to be one of the most healthy places to live. So they haven't gotten all bad yet. So we'll hope that they can learn from their past and put it into practice. Back to the lifestyle component, most people did have, and a lot of them do have, a small garden to tend to. So, gardening is good for us for many reasons. Not only is the produce good for us, but gardening is good for us physically because it's exercise, but it's also good for us mentally because it's relaxing and it's just nurturing. When you nurture something else, you nurture yourself as well. So this is still the case. The midday meal can last 2 hours and is usually followed by a nap. So what that looks like to me is I would go home at noon and somebody would be there with a big old pot of something good to eat and some bread to soak it up. And I take 2 hours of leisurely time to drink my wine and eat my meal, and then I go lay down for a half hour and take a nap. And then at 2:30 I come back to work for a couple more hours. I love it. I just love that. What do you think? You vote yes. Yeah, so they do, and this is the lifestyle. Not only, it's in Italy, but this is the lifestyle a lot of places in Europe. They do tend to lead a slower life. They're not so frantic like we are in most places. So historically also, people were poor. They had their own gardens, they had their own animals, and they lived a lifestyle that was very laid back, and they had their needs, and they took what they had and they made do with it. So they didn't have big needs like we have these days. Food was like peasant food, if you think about it like that. Lots of soups and stews and things that don't take much more than vegetables to make them delicious. Okay, so what are the benefits of the Mediterranean way? Well, it really does reduce the risk of heart disease, and it reduces that LDL or bad cholesterol, and that's because of the high content of olive oil. That olive oil really is a heart-healthy oil, fat. It helps to reduce the cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. Because of all of the fruits and vegetables and whole grains and all of that good fiber, it may reduce the risk of cancer. And some of the research studies that I read said, especially for colon cancer, ovarian cancer, and breast cancer, that the high intake of vegetables is good for. It can be associated with a decreased risk in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. And once again, that's because of the anti-inflammatory antioxidants that people would eat, and that's in the fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Also, it's associated with a decreased risk of depression, and it helps to reduce inflammation, which we see in arthritis and other diseases. I wanted to remember I said that I get an email message every day from a nutrition place, and this one came in May 19th, okay? Says Mediterranean diet may protect against late life depression. So they had a study, and this is one of the things that one of the people said about it. Adherence to a Mediterranean type diet has long been recognized as being good for health and has been associated with longer survival, reduced risk of cardiovascular or cancer mortality, and reduced risk of neurodegenerative diseases. And then he goes on to say, a Mediterranean diet might also have protective effects against cognitive decline in older people because it combines foods and nutrients potentially protective against cognitive dysfunction and dementia. I want to start eating right today. That's what more reason to eat healthy meals? What more reason? It's so simple, but so complicated. Okay. So in summary, we want to eat primarily plant-based foods and focus on fresh and in season. Like I said a minute ago, we can get everything fresh now. So what we have to focus on is just getting the most fresh. I think that foods that should be In season, in our area, probably because they are grown closer to home, maybe a little bit more nutritious. I'm not gonna stand on a soapbox and say that, but they may be. Replace butter with olive oil or canola oil. And some of you have heard me say, I use butter at home. Well, I do, because I don't use margarine, because it has its own problems. So if you do use butter, I like to use butter. But I found myself, as I was preparing for today, using a lot more olive oil and a lot less butter. So it's just, as I read and I thought, oh, I'm listening to something and I need to pay attention. So use herbs and spices instead of salt to flavor food. So I have a list of the herbs and spices that grow in that area. It's amazing. It's anise, coriander, cinnamon, cumin, dill, garlic, mint, mustard, rue, and salt. So, go figure. There's a lot of different herbs and spices, so make use of those. Herb gardens grow great here because we can put them in a shady spot and they just grow great. So if you haven't played with herb growing, I encourage you to do it. I have herbs growing all year round and they really do help flavor up the food and they're good for you. Limit red meat to once a week or less. Eat fish and seafood, and I'm saying twice a week. Some things differed, some things said 3, but I think 2 is good. Eat poultry once or twice a week. Eat with family and friends. Red wine in moderation. Grape juice has just as many antioxidants, so if you don't want to drink wine, drink grape juice. And stay active. So, what this means is we need to really have a lot more meatless meals. And I believe that I put a couple or 3 recipes in your packet that might be meatless. And if you need more, I have more, so you can come and ask me for them. So, any questions? Yes?
Scallops are considered a shell.
Right.
Are they high in protein?
Yes. Scallops are shellfish or seafood, and they're high in protein, so they're very healthy, very lean.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So on your olive oils, you know how it says first cold pressed? What does that mean?
That means that it's the first, olive oil making is really complicated, but what they do is they pick the olives and then they pit the olives and they mash them and grind them, and then they press them with a press, and it's that first pressing that they use. They don't grind them anymore and then press them again. It's that first little bit, and there's no heat put on it. So that's the cold.
Okay, so that's so good to have.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that better than the others?
There is some evidence that extra virgin and virgin are better than any of the others, just because they are processed less. So it's kind of like, well, I make a lot of jam and jelly, and so if I had some fruit that was really expensive, I might tend to get the juice out of it one time and then put it on to cook with some water and get a little bit more juice out of it. The second batch would be less fruity flavored, where the first would be really fruity flavored. Well, it's sort of the same thing. The olive oil that they re-cook it and they re-manipulate it, and then they press it again. So the Mediterranean diet was voted the year's best diet, and it says on the front page of this, learn how the year's best diet prevents chronic disease plus the keys to its implementation. So the Mediterranean way has been in the tied for first with other diets, like the DASH diet, which is for hypertension and heart disease. So it's been tied with those for several years, but this year it beat everybody out. So that's why we're seeing it everywhere, and we will see it everywhere all year. As a registered dietitian, I like it. I'm not too keen on saying, oh, I think you should go on a diet, but I like this lifestyle of the Mediterranean way. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, just let me know here at the hospital, and I can help direct you to websites that I went on where I researched some things, and I can give you some ideas for some publications. There is a good cookbook out there about the Mediterranean diet, but I want to just go cross out diet everywhere because there's too much negative with that word. So I just want to call it the Mediterranean way. I hope you all